Hi, everyone. Welcome to News Take. I'm David Chavern, President and CEO of the News Media Alliance. Since we launched, we've had News Take conversations on a wide range of topics across the news industry. And if you haven't checked them out, I highly encourage you to dive in. We've gone deep on blockchain, product thinking in newsrooms, and a wide range of other, hopefully wonky topics. Today, I want to talk about something that really doesn't get discussed as much as you would think, which is local advertising and local advertising around news products in particular. For years, it was the backbone of the news industry's success, and my guest today is the foremost expert on it and will help us understand where things stand today. Gordon Borrell founded Borrell Associates in 2001 and has become the local media industry's leading analyst. He is ranked in the top 2% among Gerson Lehrman Group's 150,000 consultants worldwide and is quoted in Ad Age, Media Post, Editor and Publisher, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Forbes, and a lot of other places. Prior to starting Borrell Associates, Gordon was vice president for new media at Landmark Communications, where he started his career 22 years earlier as a newspaper reporter. He is past chairman of the Local Media Association and Local Media Foundation. Gordon has 5 kids. That keeps you busy. Lives with his wife, a writer and book author in Hampton Roads, Virginia. Gordon, thank you very much for joining us today. Really thrilled to have you.
Thanks for inviting me, David. It's great to be here.
Good. First, let's start with your story. Tell us about yourself and how you got started in this work and how you ended up in the position you're in and dealing with the issues you deal with.
In high school, I had an English teacher who told me she thought I could write. And on top of that, I had a mother who was a grammarian who used to, on the fly, correct spellings or punctuate as she spoke. She'd put her hands on her hips and she said, "You didn't take the trash out yesterday, period. Yep. Therefore, comma, you will be doing the dishes the rest of the week, exclamation point." So I became a reporter in college and an editor and wound up working with the Virginian Pilot as a reporter and then an editor into the 1980s, and then moved over to the business side and in interactive media, believe it or not, which existed in the late 80s prior to the internet becoming a commercial medium, and was in charge of developing new media. I was vice president of new media for Landmark Communications, which owns the Virginian Pilot, yep, and the Weather Channel and the Travel Channel and Auto Trader books and television stations, and other newspapers. My job was to bring them online, whether it was AOL or Prodigy or CompuServe or the internet. And so from there, I learned an awful lot about disruptive innovation, working with Clay Christensen, who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma, and how incumbent businesses, in our case, media companies, would be challenged and act a certain way, which wasn't so good, to a disruptive innovation like the internet and distribution of content. And I started my own business in 2001. And here I am today trying to help media companies understand the much larger opportunity ahead of them rather than trying to just turn their product into some type of digital product and say, we're done. There's a lot bigger opportunity out there.
That's super interesting. By the way, I think later in the conversation, I want to circle back to sort of the early engagement with the internet from news publishers, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about, mistakes were made. A lot of mistakes were made, but I don't think they're the mistakes people think were made. But we'll come back to that. But let's focus on sort of the initial topic that we were thinking about talking about, which is local advertising. And frankly, local advertising is a backbone of media in a lot of places. I think people spend very little time thinking about and understanding local advertisers. When they think about advertising, they think about the big CPG brands and the big agencies placing big buys across the country. But, if you look at volume and if you look at economic impact, local advertising is huge. And I think people don't understand it, don't think about it enough, and also don't understand that while, yes, there's the individual flower shop buying ads, there's also, chains of car dealers placing many multi-million dollars of ad buys. There's a lot of activity at the local side. tell me a little bit about how we should think about a local advertiser today and what they want and the sort of option set available to them.
Let me go back a little bit of history as to how I got where I was. I recall in the very latter part of my career listening to um, someone who had just come in as a publisher, and he happened to be the owner's son. And he came in and he was named publisher, and everybody gathered around, and he said, you know, and he's a friend of mine. I know him, nice guy, bright. And he said, you know, today, and this is a room of people running a big metro newspaper. When you think about it, we're really in the business of, what I wanted to hear was, informing the public and exposing the bad guys and all those altruistic things about journalism. And he said exactly this: helping people sell things. And I was pissed. And a lot of other people, I think, were like, what? What are you talking about here?
Yeah.
80% of the revenue of the newspaper back then came from advertisers. And you think about it, they paid the newsroom salary. They paid everybody's salaries, right? The 20% from circulation pretty much paid for the circulation and the trucks and the paper and the printing presses. So when I started the business, I thought, this is where newspapers will lose their way. They will believe it's all about news and content. And to a great extent, it certainly is. And I come from the newsroom, let me remind you. But if we don't understand that the people who really support the newspaper are the advertisers, and they need to be able to use the newspaper or look to the newspaper company to help them sell things, to help them grow their business. If we fumble that, we don't have a newspaper. So my business tracks the flow of advertising because I thought that's where people would get screwed up. Newspapers would go, oh, wow, this is about putting our great content online. And remember the mantra, information wants to be free.
Yeah.
The very first project I did as a company when I started Borrell Associates was a research paper on how much people, consumers, were willing to pay for local news content. And it still holds true today. This is 21 years ago. It's under $1 per month. And I said, well, screw that. There's not going to be a whole lot of money in that. That's not going to be enough to support a newsroom. It's still under $1 a month because so much competition for free information out there. So we track local advertising. These businesses have an amazing amount of choices. But one thing has happened since the pandemic. It was trending or tracking along a certain way. We've been watching it, and then the pandemic kicked in and triggered it, which I think provides an awful lot of good news for local media, particularly newspapers.
Yeah. So again, the thinking about, I don't know, let's just take your prototypical car dealer in a community, right? Advertise regularly, historically very attached to classifieds or whatever the local newspaper was, but now have a whole range of optionality, right? There's the internet pure play about looking car search. There's certainly local publisher. There's Facebook and the rest. When you talk to somebody in that space, and again, something like a car dealer or chain of car dealers is doing a lot of advertising, spending a lot of money. What does their option set look like? And then how do they think about their local publisher in their option set?
Their option set's like walking into the most cacophonous carnival that you could imagine. You got the tilt-a-whirl over here, and you got the Ferris wheel over there, and you got the cotton candy and the corn dogs, and there's just too much shit to look at, right? And to choose from. And your kids are yanking you in this direction, and your wife's yanking you in that direction. And then there's the newspaper, and it's a guy with a table, and he's got a newspaper, and he's not really making a whole lot of noise. Newspapers really do have to make noise, and they do have to understand that they're in competition. One of the biggest things about the newspaper industry, and anybody who has been in it, in the 1980s and 1990s, I believe will agree, was this tremendous arrogance that we're the big guys and we own everything. We don't need to make a lot of noise. People just come to us. I can recall in Chicago once somebody from the Chicago Tribune telling me in the 1990s, this was, that we can kill the Chicago Sun-Times and many other types of media just by raising our rates. That will force the advertiser to make a decision, and they're going to pick us.
Okay.
So I hope that's been shaken out of the industry. The advertiser, the car dealership has way too many choices. The one thing that they're looking for that is just really, really important for any media company to know is not, I want to buy newspaper advertising. I want to buy autotrader.com or cars.com. I want to buy this. I want to buy that. They don't know what the hell to buy. They need somebody to talk to who will help them understand the overall marketplace. Once you gain their trust, they might buy newspaper advertising. They might buy outdoor. They might buy direct mail, but you're in there influencing them. They're lost in this big carnival. They're looking for, believe it or not, a local media person or an ad agency to help guide them through all of this. And I think that's a very important thing for newspapers to understand.
So, to that point, that car dealer is in a crazy circus, but really there's a need for a local guide, right? And again, at the end of the day, they can hire some big national agency, but probably trust. And again, we're in the trust business, I think. If somebody asked me what our business is, I think trust is a core component of it. Having a trusted relationship with somebody who's willing to guide them through that is a role that new local publishers can and should play, right?
Oh, absolutely. There are a couple things at play. One, I'll just briefly mention, and let me get back to the trust issue. And that is, newspapers are in the information business, of course. And part of that role is information about local businesses. What's on sale? As Ada Fox, the publisher of the New York Times, a century ago said, all advertising is news. If it's not news, it's worthless. So think about that and think about it. I don't want news. I'm not saying newsrooms should be involved in advertising and help advertisers tell their story, but somebody, for God's sakes, needs to help advertisers tell their story. Yeah. All these local businesses, these local entrepreneurs that are fighting against the Targets and the Amazons and the Walmarts and some of the big franchises, which provide a little unfair competition to these local entrepreneurs, can turn to the local newspaper for help in having them tell their story. Hey, I've been around for 50 years. I'm a family-run business and I'm part of the community. Hey, I need help with my ad. The classic story of the ad, the full-page ad that's in the newspaper, and it's got 1,000 things in it for a hardware store. It's got a picture of the new employee. It's got rakes for sale. It's got their business location, their hours of operation, contest. Nobody reads that ad because there's too much to see. Yet if you tell the advertiser, hey, I'll pay for the ad for free, I'll give you a full-page ad, but I get to say what the ad says. And the ad's going to say, come down to Bob's Hardware for a free $20 bill. No. He would never buy that ad. Why? Or never allow that ad. Why? The ad works.
Yeah.
It's the message. Yeah. They need help with their message. So that's one thing. So, but I think that's important. Helping these local entrepreneurs, they're the backbone of this country, tell their story and establish their businesses, which provide more tax dollars back into the local community. It keeps more money in the community than does a Walmart, for instance, is really important. So David, the trust issue, this is really interesting. A latest survey that we did showed that something around 87% of advertisers say that if the local newspaper went away, it would have a negative effect on the community. 87%. Got that? Okay. So when you ask those advertisers why they buy, these are people who buy newspaper advertising now, why they buy newspaper advertising, is it for direct response, or is it for overall branding of your company, or is it to look, to portray yourself as being part of the community and supporting the community? Which of those three do you think ranks highest? They want to be seen as part of the community, and they believe the newspaper does a better job than radio or TV, them being seen as part of the community. And they believe that's important. Why? It goes back to their competition against the come-heres, the Targets, the Walmarts, and the others. There's this sense in local communities that we have to support our newspaper, And the advertisers like that, the local businesses like that. I think this is a key to selling to them and being in a partnership with them to help them. This is their big differentiator. Anybody can throw coupons in the mail or buy a billboard, but when you're part of the community because you're supporting the newspaper and seen as supporting the community, I think that's a big differentiator. And that trust is really valuable. The trust for local news, the trust for, hey, you're a local business too. You've been around for a very long time. That's great. There's something to be mined there by newspaper companies.
Oh, yeah, incredible. And how do you both foster that trust and continue to expand it, but also not on the other side of the coin, you can rely on it and not invest in it and, degrade it over time. But it is our secret sauce at the end of the day, and a whole range of things in our relationship with customers and advertisers. I have to tell you, just in terms of comment, I'll do a little side commentary. There's been news recently about the sale of Axios. And if you look at Axios's business, it's essentially these newsletters that have a couple of native advertising units. So we call them native advertising. I think they call them smart posts in it. That are written in their style. So it reads in that smart brevity style, it reads like the rest of the Axios product. At some level, it's not the most, it's not the newest idea around the block, a native ad. They've been doing that for as long as there have been newspapers, I think. But you can tell it's consultative, right? It is a message that an advertiser has that is then written. I don't know if it's written by Axios, but written in the Axios style. It's sort of a partnership to make that ad unit be effective. And that ultimately gets to, I think, this point you make about, ad engagements are really consultations with local advertisers now, and not just, hey, here's this thing. Do you want to buy it or not? Right. At the end of the day.
Yep. I think advertisers really do need that consultative approach. I think they are looking for native advertising or content marketing, if you want to call it that. More of it is geared toward video. And, so many advertisers, dream of being on television, but can't afford it. And when OTT or online video marketing comes along, it's certainly a fantastic disruptor. It's a disruptive innovation. And television, which is the video king, right, in any market, is missing the mark because they're doing what a classic incumbent business does. And that is, this is something that's going to erode our core customer base of these really big advertisers that spend an average of $111,000 a year. That's the average television budget. And the average newspaper budget, by the way, is about $30,000. The average radio budget is about $35,000. So it's a big budget. These are the big advertisers. They're selling OTT to them. So they're selling a very small price product and eroding their core product. Here's what they forget. Here's what I want newspapers to know is whenever a disruptive innovation comes along, it creates a completely new customer. It's a very different product than what it looks like it's disrupting, in this case, television advertising. The most likely, I'm slowing down to say this for effect, the most likely type of advertiser to buy video advertising is a radio advertiser.
Oh, interesting.
And there is newspapers' opportunity. If you look at all the folks who bought OTT advertising in spring of this year, we run the largest survey of local advertisers. We surveyed about 2,000 of them in the spring. We're going to do it again in the fall. 70% of those buying OTT advertising are radio advertisers. Radio. Only about 40% are newspaper advertisers. So if you want to go after, a competitor's base, radio, you got an OTT product, go after them and help them tell their story. That's the native advertising they want. They want to be standing in front of their plumber's truck talking about they've been in business in this town as a plumber for, 50 years. Or they want to talk about, let's say they're a dentist, teeth whitening or tooth implants, or LASIK surgeons, want to talk about their latest equipment. Help them tell their story. Video is not only a great way to do it, it's it can be really expensive. It can bring in a lot of money, and it's terrific for the advertisers. So many different distribution points for it. Their own website, YouTube, out there in the OTT networks and things like that. I can be very excited about this opportunity for native advertising for newspapers. Axios, I'm not sure where that's going.
Yeah. Yeah, they, it's yeah, it is interesting if you look at their business again. It's pretty clean at some level, right? It's a bunch of free newsletters in which they have these native ad units. What has been intriguing to me is really those units seem to be part of an engagement with advertisers in a way that maybe a lot of publishers weren't used to. But let's jump to let's dig further into this point about, I've talked about this idea of convergence, format convergence, right? There used to be things called newspapers, and there used to be radio stations, there used to be TV stations. A couple of those needed an FTC license. But now, it's a huge internet blender in which everybody's trying to live off the telephone. And that, to your point, also opens up a lot of opportunities. And again, if you look at the audience for a news publisher, I was exchanging a bunch of emails with a reporter the other day, and he was talking about print circulation. I was like, print circulation's down, got it. But that used to be the singular metric about news publisher audience. Easy to understand, one number, up or down. There you go. I said, now, listen, we got print audience, we got our website audience, we got app audiences, we got e-reader audiences. Often we have audio audiences and video audiences, social audiences. And each of those things is different, by the way, different economics attached to them. And we don't yet as an industry tell a great story about everybody's reading our content. The one thing is we're creating the content and distributing it a bunch of different ways now, and that will increase. But talk more about sort of this legacy media blender where you have news publishers, say local TV, local radio. Everybody's rushing to the phone, everybody's iPhone. Who's got advantages and who's got disadvantages? Is it possible, by the way, that news publishers end up in a better place because they have a opportunity to take some of this other space?
In our podcast series over the summer, which you were a part of, thank you very much, and knocked it out of the park. We've had the highest downloads for our interview with you, and you've been up against some pretty formidable interviews. The CEO of Nexstar, Perry Sook, your counterpart at the National Association of Broadcasters, Curtis Leggett,
good guy, the
CEO of Salem Media. So you did really well, David. Thank you very much.
Happy to do it.
But over the summer, we're doing this series, and we've interviewed Bob Pittman, the CEO of iHeart, and the head, I think, new one coming up is the head of Clear Channel Outdoor Advertising. There's a theme, and I didn't expect it to emerge. And it was, well, there's going to be this convergence or rejoining. If you look at newspapers, from the time of Hearst, right, and then they were out there and they had lots of newspapers, and this thing called radio came along in 1920 and they got into radio. And then this thing called television came along. The first FCC licenses for television were issued in 1948 and they got into that. And they were started by one company, let's say a Hearst or Cox or others. But there's this notion that they're all going to come back together. So I found that really interesting, but I'm not sure. And I'm just not sure. I'm not saying it won't. I'm not sure that it will. And here's why. If you looked at newspapers and you said, okay, the very first thing that the new medium that they got into was, outside of magazines, is radio. The first electronic medium was radio. How successful would a radio station be if they used newspaper reporters to just kind of, rip and read news over the air? So radio required a completely different staff. When television came along, how successful would radio be porting over the old stars from Dragnet and Gunsmoke and the precursor to I Love Lucy, which was My Favorite Husband and the Jack Benny Show, over to TV? Well, it was, but it wasn't just radio. It was a lot of sight gags because it was video and everything. My point is this, that each iteration of the newspaper as it went along required a completely different staff and a completely different set of talent, lights, cameras, and actions rather than pens or typewriters. So here we are with the internet, and I'm not sure that you can create content in one place and then distribute it to radio or distribute it to TV and distribute it to the internet in the form that each of those media would find acceptable. So that concerns me. There is, however, the economics of it, David, and that is, okay, if the FCC now is relaxed on its rules of cross-media ownership, saying, well, yeah, you really can't control an audience anymore if you own the newspaper and the television station and some radio stations in the market, the economics of running that together might be very high. And I do think there is a pretty strong possibility that we'll begin to see that a bit more, where a cluster of radio stations, a major television station, NBC affiliate, Fox affiliate, if they still have those affiliations, and that's in question, and a printed product, magazine or newspaper, whatever it becomes on a weekly basis, and then some internet operation. That is one hell of a powerful asset to have, all those three together or four together in a marketplace. It goes back to Stuart Bryant's idea, CEO of Media General, with this convergence center in Tampa in the year 2000. They plowed $40 million into that and put the Tampa Tribune in it, and TBO.com and WFLA. And that was the idea. It collapsed in 3 years, as most other interactive units did, under the pressure of, wow, we got to keep the core products up. But I do think there may be something there. I'm still scratching my head a bit on how that would actually work, and whether the history of new media would indicate that, several products can be put together to generate, the core product itself that pushes out on different platforms. Historically, that really hasn't worked out all that well.
Yeah, what I find interesting about that is, let's just take those three. Let's take local TV, and local news publisher. Throw the local city magazine in there too, right? All of what you see is there are legacy businesses that still generate a lot of economic return, more than people realize, be it print or local broadcast or the rest. And so there is keeping those engines running. But I think the challenge, and you've kind of identified it, is the future is this thing that it'll be delivered over people's phones or their connected TVs. And I think those products are all different than the legacy products, meaning I don't know that a streaming TV news product is Bob and Sally behind a desk at 6 for 22 minutes, right? With a cue to the sportscaster. Maybe, I don't know. I think, the TV product that's going to be responsive and native to streaming is going to be different. Same with podcasting and radio, and again, I think news publishers are still in this process of understanding what kind of textual news product makes sense in the internet space. So at least I'm personally kind of interested in the convergence side, but I also think like everybody's going to have to change. Does that make sense? Is that rational?
It does. It concerns me though that back in 1960, Peter Drucker had a famous article in Harvard Business Review that told the story of the railroad industry and why so many of them had been failing and going into bankruptcy. And what he said was that the industry of transportation, the business they were actually in, was expanding, but they defined themselves as being in the railroad industry, which was moving passengers back and forth. Meanwhile, planes were taking people places, and trucks and cars,
highways,
and buses, right? So if we're talking about the newspaper industry and we're defining ourselves as local news and maybe softly expanding it to local news and information, then it makes me wonder if that's the appropriate definition or that's too limiting. If the information business can be expanded into maybe the entertainment business, or it's an infotainment maybe, and you can understand what that means, then you have much broader opportunities. So we were talking a few minutes ago about convergence, and maybe this idea of convergence is going to happen when everything kind of converges again, and there's one newsroom or one content operation, and it pushes it out on multiple platforms. Tell me, David, if your average local newspaper were to get together with the average local television station, for instance, in their newsroom, would they ever develop anything like Facebook? Would they ever do anything on Facebook other than say, hey, here's our news on Facebook? And do you go to Facebook for news? So that's not it. Would they ever do anything at all with TikTok or Instagram Reels? So what I'm saying is, if you're defining it narrowly as, hey, we're just a news operation, you're missing the opportunity that William Randolph Hearst didn't miss when radio came along. He said, well, that's not a news medium, even though the first broadcast of radio was rip and read from a Pittsburgh newspaper atop the Westinghouse building. And interestingly enough, it was the 1920 election results that were between two newspaper publishers, Jim Cox and I believe Warren Harding. But anyway, I digress. My point is that when radio came along, it became an entertainment medium. It became about music and nighttime serials, nothing really to do with newspapers. So television comes along, and it goes back to entertainment and maybe news programming, which really didn't come along until the 1960s. So you have to look at the internet and digital forms of distribution and mobile forms of distribution as something different than just news. It is news, but if you box yourself in and just define yourself as that, I think you're just putting the constraints on in a way that really limits the opportunities.
So interesting. Okay. So, I want, when I was on your show, you asked me about the world 10 years from now, and I gave you some crazy ideas. And I want to get to that in terms of your ideas about the industry 10 years from now. But I want to build upon one of your early, in the introductory comments, you talked about being there with the early engagement of before the internet, right? Interactive digital media, and then the internet. And, there is a lot of assumption about all the intense mistakes and stupidities that was executed by then the dominant news publishers at the time. And, let's assume all that's correct. But also there was a lot of experimentation, a lot of new products, huge amounts of investment in news publishers in digital products that, for the most part, one way or another didn't pan out. I mean, there were really people trying to figure it out at the time. I have a sense, by the way, that we're in a new bend in the river in terms of technology, be it because of ad tech and cookieless future and the rest, or these convergence ideas. I think there's going to be new chapters to our technology evolution. And I want to make sure, one of my goals is to make sure that we capture the wave at this time in the right way, as opposed to not capturing it. But when you look back at, those early engagements with the industry with these digital distribution options, what do you think were the clearest mistakes? And then what do you think people get wrong about that era of just, continue exercise of local monopoly power? What do you think people don't understand?
I think there were probably three clear mistakes, and I can go all the way back to Bob Ingalls and Knight Ridder in the 1980s, mid 80s, with a digital distribution platform. You really couldn't call it digital, although I guess it was. It was just telephone modem, bulletin board service. This is prior to CompuServe and AOL. So the experience was there. And then a lot of folks approached CompuServe and AOL in the newspaper industry as if it were just a news, distribution channel. So I think that was the first mistake, is not understanding, as I said, the newspaper industry tackled radio as, wow, this is a different medium and it's not about news. We'll put we'll turn our newspaper name into the call letters of the station. KCRG for Cedar Rapids Gazette, and WSBT stood for the South Bend Tribune. But that's where it stops. It's all about the capabilities of that new medium. So the early stage, the first problem was, it's all about our news product. We're going to distribute our news product this way. And they forgot the lesson that, wow, it's a different experience and there are other opportunities to do other things. Another mistake was not understanding that one of the most powerful, and I hesitate to say it's the most powerful attractions to the newspaper, at least until the early 2000s, was the advertising.
Yeah.
Half of the people, I think it was 51% actually, who picked up a newspaper in the late 90s on Sunday, picked it up because of the advertising, not the news. Yeah. And that should have been a revelation to the industry that, hey, wait, our classified ads, that's a big draw. We're getting it both ways because we're selling a subscription to the paper and we're taking money from the advertiser. So that was mistake number 2, is not understanding the power of the news in the advertising. Yeah. I stood and watched. This actually happened. Somebody wrote about it. So it's out there on the internet somewhere. Mm-hmm. A woman in a 7-Eleven come in and buy a newspaper, and she was kind of in a dirty pink sweatsuit. And she's smoking a Camel cigarette. She bought a newspaper on a Sunday, and she came out. She stood by the trash can. She threw the damn thing away, except for the coupons. And I watched her, and I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, I got to ask you a question. You just bought that newspaper for $1.50, and you threw most of it in the trash can." And she held up the coupons, and she said, "There's a 60% off coupon here for Bed Bath & Beyond, and at least $100 worth of coupons in here that I'm going to use. And I spent $1.50. Who's the genius?" Exactly what
that is amazing. Who's the genius?
So that was mistake number 2. Yeah. Mistake number 3, and this was kind of out of their hands, I would guess, was the whole economics of it. And that was, oh my God, we're beginning to lose our margins. We're beginning to lose, the franchise. We need to cut expenses. This digital stuff in the year 1995 through about 2000, 2001, when everybody was creating interactive units, Tribune Interactive, Bealo Interactive, New York Times Interactive, Washington Post Newsweek Interactive, Cox Interactive Media, within 5 years, they all collapsed because of the economic pressure. Classified advertising in recruitment alone went from $9 billion in the year 2000 to less than $4.5 billion within 3 years.
Wow.
So as that shut down, people went, oh, the hell with this digital stuff. There's no ROI in it. We need to cut it out, preserve our margins. So those are the 3 mistakes I think that occurred. And then after that, it just became a long, painful drip, certainly exacerbated by the Great Recession, 2008, 9, and 10, that just said, wow, yeah, okay, we're doing stuff in digital, but we got to keep our margins up. And that was tough.
Yeah, it's interesting. Craigslist is the classic Clayton Christensen Innovator's Dilemma product, right? It's not necessarily a better classified product. It's free. So, but also, grinding through Craigslist is not always the easiest thing, but it brought a whole new set of customers to them in terms of people who, wouldn't have wanted to spend $100 on a classified ad for getting rid of a bike or something, right? So that's it was truly disruptive in that sense.
There's a brief story I can tell you that was very interesting. When I was with Landmark Communications as vice president of new media, we were strategizing for Auto Trader, which we owned half of for Cox with Cox. And it was $1 billion business, $1 billion on a very high margin, 48% margin. We loved that business. Right. So when we were strategizing what we were going to do on the internet, we were rubbing our hands together because we were going to add an extra $5 for every one of the million listings or however many there were, just for the right to distribute them on the internet. So we're going to make even more money, extremely high margin. And our chairman, a guy named Frank Batten, who was aligned with Clay Christensen and knew this disruptive innovation stuff, said, no, we're not going to do that. we're going to put all those listings online from Auto Trader, the books, the billion-dollar business. We're going to put all those listings online for free. We're not going to charge for them. You had to pay $1 for the book. We're not going to charge the advertiser for them. We're not going to charge people to access them. And we're going, what the hell is this all about? And we said, well, why? And he said, because on the internet, the largest database wins. It's all about the massive data. When you begin restricting advertisers, saying you're going to have to pay an extra $5, and they begin cutting back, we no longer have the largest database. And then we famously said, well, how are we going to make money? And he said, that's what I'm paying you guys for. So
that's Silicon Valley all over. So there you go. Yeah.
Within about 6 years, David, the books disappeared. They went away. $1 billion business on a 48% margin went away. And what rose in its place was autotrader.com, which was close to $1 billion at the time. Now is much more than that, but on a little bit less of a margin, about a 35% margin. So it was like, wow, that was a really painful decision, but it was the absolute right decision to make. So it's a challenge to look at your existing business model. You're always going to screw up if you apply your existing business model to the new medium. You have to look at it differently, just as newspapers looked at radio differently, just as radio looked at TV differently when it came along, created a new staff, tuned the specs of its product exactly to what the medium could deliver.
Yeah, and interesting. That's so interesting. And I think we're coming to another one of those sets of moments, right, where you really got to rethink all of the underlying elements of the business and figure out how you're going to make those right choices. What are going to be the winning attributes? So with that, Gordon, by the way, fantastic conversation. Really, this has been wonderful, and I really appreciate you doing it. So let me kick it back to you about 10 years from now. Do you can make a prediction on anything you'd like, media, advertising, the world, space travel, whatever you're interested in. But yeah, what are you following, and what do you think 10 years from now might look like?
Hell, I can't figure out what next week's going to look like, David. It's interesting. I think if you look 10 years down the road, there is an aging population. So we are going to have an economy that's geared a lot toward older people and healthcare and wealth management and travel. I think you're also going to see some revitalization of some of these smaller rural cities where people realize, oh, hell, I can work from anywhere. I'm going to go back here and work, or I'm going to retire or semi-retire and go back to the community I grew up in. And I'm a millionaire, have loads of money. I did well on my investments in Apple and Microsoft and whatever. Yeah. And they might plow money into their communities. We're already seeing some of that occur. So it's this revitalization of rural America. I think everything is electric. I am rapidly trying to get rid of all the, God, I think it's like 17 gasoline-powered engines I have in my house, from generators to weed whackers to lawnmowers to cars, right? Yeah. So, there's a lot of stuff that's electric. 95% of all information will be accessed via some digital means, whether it's a smartphone access through the internet, your television access through the internet. So there's something to consider there. I think there will be newspapers, we might call them magazines, or the company formerly known as newspapers, that will fit into a niche and serve the community that wants a printed product to sit and read. I think they'll still be around. I think radio will still be around and TV will still be around. I do think there will be in each market one monolithic go-to company. Even in the small market, it'll be a small monolith. Yeah. That is the company that you go to if you really want to market yourself. And I think everybody else will be a distant second. And it will be the company that has an audience. So they have their O&O type audience. Yep. Plus, they've mastered all these other marketing capabilities. They're going to be great storytellers. They're going to be very, very creative. That will be the biggest asset, I think, is creativity. And they'll be great marketers overall. And they'll also protect and preserve their communities with information in many, many different forms, and entertainment as well. So I'm looking forward to the formation of that type of company out of the ashes of whatever radio becomes, because they're declining as well. And local broadcast TV is really struggling with advertising, and newspapers are, of course. So something will form, a phoenix, if you will, that I think is going to be one very powerful company in each market.
Yeah, and we'll also have the relationships with the people in that community, and we undersell relationships a lot because the current systems, nobody has a personal relationship with Google, right? I mean, this current systems kind of undersell relationship and this sort of advisory kind of component. But I think there's still value in that, and somebody who can figure out how to attach that relationship component to very cutting edge systems and viewpoints, I think will be a winner, right? This is fantastic, Gordon. I really can't thank you enough. Very much appreciate the time and attention, and most of all, tremendous thoughts and great thinking. We're definitely going to have you back, and I'm happy to go on your podcast anytime. So with that, I just want to thank you again, and our audience will please check out our other podcasts as well. Take care.
Great. Thank you, David. Thanks for having me.